Bible contains stories so intense, most people have never even heard of them. Entire cities burned to the ground. Kingdoms collapsed. Men disappeared into darkness. And battles were fought against impossible odds. These were not perfect heroes. They were outcasts, servants, runaways, warriors, and men pushed to their absolute limits. But their stories changed history forever. These are the forgotten heroes of the Bible. One wrong sound, and he would die. As Onesimus grabbed the silver coins, his hands would not stop shaking, one guard catching him inside the house, and the runaway slave would never leave alive. A young slave was risking everything for one chance at freedom, but escaping the house would become the easiest part of his journey, because he was convinced to go back to the same master he had once betrayed. How did a boy willingly go back to the man he once betrayed? To understand this, we must go back to the beginning of Onesimus' story. A wealthy man named Philemon lived in a large, busy city called Colossae. He was a very important person with a very big house. He was also a Christian. Every week, he opened his beautiful home to host a church. People would gather in his courtyard to sing songs. They would share meals together. They would listen to stories about Jesus. They talked about how God loves everyone equally. But when the church service ended, the beautiful words stopped. The guests went home, and Philemon went back to being a Roman master. And in that big house he owned a slave. His name was Onesimus. Under Roman law, Onesimus was not considered a human being. He wasn't a person with feelings, dreams, or rights. The law saw him as property. He was a living tool, just like a broom or a plow, but with a voice. In fact, his very name, Onesimus, meant useful. He was only kept around because he could work. Imagine what it must have been like for him. Every week, he would stand quietly in the corner of the room, holding a pitcher of wine or a plate of bread. He would listen to Philemon and the guests talk about how God brings freedom and love to the world. But as soon as the meeting was over, he was ordered back to the kitchens. He was yelled at. He was treated like an object. Hearing about freedom while living in a cage is a terrible kind of torture. It bred a quiet, simmering desperation deep inside his heart. He did not want to be a tool anymore. He wanted to be a man. Until finally, the tension in his mind snapped. Onesimus decided to do the most dangerous thing a person could do in the ancient world. He decided to run away. But he knew the world outside was harsh. He could not survive with nothing. So, before he slipped out into the dark night, he crept into his master's rooms. He found Philemon's money. He took the silver coins, put them in a small pouch, and ran. In the 1st century, running away from your master was a terrible crime. But running away and stealing from your master was a death sentence. A runaway slave who stole was a dead man walking. The Roman Empire did not show mercy to slaves who broke the rules. The punishment was absolute and meant to scare anyone else who might try the same thing. If the soldiers caught him, they would heat a piece of iron in a fire and brand the letter F on his forehead. F stood for fugitive. He would wear that burn mark for the rest of his life. Or worse, they would throw him into a dirt arena with starving lions for the crowds to watch. Or they would nail him to a wooden cross and leave him to die slowly. With the stolen coins heavy in his pouch and a massive target on his back, Onesimus fled. He ran through the dark streets of Colossae. He hid in the backs of wagons. He walked down dusty roads for weeks. He made the long, perilous journey across land and sea to get as far away from his master as possible. He was heading to the massive city of Rome. Rome was the center of the world. It was a sprawling, chaotic, dirty, and loud metropolis. Over 1 million people lived there. The streets were packed with merchants shouting, soldiers marching, and carts crashing over stone roads. For a hunted man, it offered the absolute best disguise. Onesimus plunged deep into the twisting, dark streets of the city's poorest slums. He rented a small corner to sleep in. He bought fresh bread. He tried to blend in with the massive crowds. He tried to build a new life, but there was a problem. The stolen money did not last forever. Slowly, day by day, the coins in his pouch disappeared. When the very last coin ran out, the cold, harsh reality of his situation set in. He was a man with no money, no legal standing, no family to help him, and no protection. He could not just go get a normal job because someone would ask who his master was. He was completely alone. He started to starve, and worse than the hunger was the fear. Every single knock on a wooden door made his heart stop. Every lingering glance from a Roman soldier in shiny armor made his blood run cold. He knew that bounty hunters made a living by catching runaway slaves and bringing them back for a reward. Every step he took in the city was dangerous. He had run thousands of miles to be free. He was physically free from Philemon, yes, but he was now completely enslaved by his own terror. He was trapped in a prison of his own mind. Then, in the middle of this dark, terrifying life, he crossed paths with one man. His name was Paul. Paul was a famous apostle of Jesus, but he was not standing on a stage preaching to thousands of people. Paul was a prisoner. He was under house arrest, waiting to stand trial before the most powerful man in the world, the Roman emperor. Because he was a high-profile prisoner, Paul was chained by the wrist to a heavily armed Roman guard 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We do not know exactly how the starving runaway slave found the chained old man. But while hiding in Rome, Onesimus walked into Paul's room. Paul could have easily turned him in. Paul could have called the guards. But Paul did not turn the fugitive in. Instead, he looked at this terrified, dirty, exhausted young man and showed him love. He shared the gospel with him. Paul spoke of a liberation of the soul that no Roman emperor could ever grant and no master could ever take away. He told him that Jesus was the ultimate king, but that Jesus came to earth as a servant to save everyone. He told Onesimus that God did not see him as property or as a tool. God saw him as a beloved son. Sitting on the dirt floor of a Roman prison house, listening to a man wearing iron chains, the runaway slave finally found true freedom. He surrendered his life to Christ. The transformation inside Onesimus was immediate and total. Before, his only goal was survival. His only goal was hiding. But now, instead of running further to protect himself, Onesimus chose to stay in the most dangerous city in the world. He decided to stay right there in that small room and serve Paul. He became a deeply trusted assistant. He went out into the dangerous streets to buy food for the aging apostle. He carried messages. He cleaned the floors. He washed Paul's clothes. For the first time in his entire life, Onesimus lived up to the meaning of his name. He was incredibly useful. He was not serving because he was forced to by a whip. He was serving because he wanted to out of love. Paul grew to love this young man deeply. Paul would later write a letter saying that Onesimus had become his very heart. They were like father and son. Months passed like this. It was a beautiful time of healing. But Paul was a wise man, and he knew the harsh truth of the law. Under Roman law, Onesimus still legally belonged to Philemon. The fact that Onesimus was now a Christian did not change his legal status in the eyes of the empire. Keeping Onesimus in Rome meant Paul was actively harboring a known fugitive. That was a serious crime, but there was something even more important than the Roman law. It was the law of love. Paul knew that keeping Onesimus meant leaving a deep, painful, unhealed fracture between two Christian brothers. Philemon was sitting back in Colossae, feeling betrayed and robbed. Onesimus was sitting in Rome, carrying the secret guilt of what he had done. You cannot build a new, beautiful life on top of a stolen, broken foundation. The wrong had to be made right. The stolen money had to be accounted for. The past had to be faced. Paul made an agonizing, heartbreaking decision. He looked at the young man he loved like a son, and he told Onesimus he had to go back. Think about how terrifying that sentence must have been. To go back to Colossae was to walk directly into the jaws of a legal system that demanded his blood. Philemon had every right to execute him on the spot. No one would stop him. In fact, the law would demand that an example be made to deter the other slaves in the city from running away. Yet, Onesimus agreed to go. This is the true proof of his changed heart. He was no longer a terrified fugitive running from his past. He was a brave man, filled with faith, willing to face the deadly consequences of his actions to make things right. Finally, he arrived. Onesimus walked up to the big house. The guards surely grabbed him immediately. He was brought into the courtyard to stand before the man he had robbed and abandoned. Philemon looked at his runaway property, but before the chains could be brought out, before the soldiers could be called, Onesimus reached into his clothes and handed Philemon the letter. Philemon unrolled the paper and began to read. In that letter, Paul made a radical, world-changing request. Paul did not use his power as an apostle to order Philemon to release the slave. Instead, he appealed to love. He reminded Philemon that they were all saved by grace. And then he asked Philemon to forgive Onesimus. Paul wrote, "I appeal to you for my son Onesimus, who became my son while I was in chains. He is coming back to you." Then came the line that would echo through history. Paul told Philemon to welcome Onesimus back, no longer as a slave, but better than a slave, as a dear brother. Paul was asking for the impossible. He was asking a wealthy Roman master to completely shatter the social rules of the empire right inside his own home.
What about the crime?
He was asking Philemon to embrace his runaway property as a spiritual equal. He was asking him to seat a criminal at the same dining table. But what about the crime? What about the silver coins that were stolen? Paul removed that barrier completely. He wrote, "If he has wronged you or owes you anything, charge that to my account. I, Paul, am writing this with my own hand. I will pay it back." Paul took the debt of a guilty man and placed it on his own shoulders. The Bible does not record the exact look on Philemon's face in the moment he finished reading those powerful words, but history tells us the outcome. We know the outcome because the letter itself was saved. It was preserved carefully. It was copied by hand over and over again. And eventually, it was bound into the sacred scriptures of the Christian faith. It is in the Bible today. That never would have happened if Philemon had torn the letter up and executed his slave. It was kept because Philemon did exactly what Paul asked. He dropped his anger. He gave up his rights. He forgave him. And so ends the true story of Onesimus, a man who had every reason in the world to keep running, but chose to turn back. One wrong move, and he would get completely destroyed by everyone. A single exhausted man stood alone against 600 Philistine soldiers with nothing but a wooden ox goad. The men looked at him and thought he was crazy. Few laughed at him, and many mocked him. But as he was swinging his ox goad, the men looked closely at his face and realized he was a complete monster with legendary strength. How did a simple man working alone in the fields become the most terrifying warrior an army had ever seen? To understand this, we must go back to the beginning of Shamgar's story. Long ago, the land of Israel groaned beneath the brutal oppression of the Philistines. Their empire spread across the region like an iron shadow, swallowing villages, controlling trade routes, and terrorizing entire communities wherever their armies marched. The Philistines were feared everywhere because they possessed something the Israelites did not: superior weapons, trained soldiers, and complete military control. Their warriors marched in heavy bronze armor that glimmered beneath the blazing sun. Long iron spears rested in their hands, curved swords hung from their sides. Entire villages would go silent the moment the sound of Philistine armor echoed through nearby hills. But the Philistines did not simply conquer Israel with armies alone. According to 1 Samuel 13, they created a cruel system designed to keep the Israelites weak forever. The Philistine rulers removed all the blacksmiths from the land, so no Israelite could forge weapons of war. No swords could be made, no spears, no shields. Even basic farming tools had to be sharpened inside Philistine territory for expensive prices. Israel became completely defenseless. The fear spread across the nation slowly at first, then consumed everything. Roads once crowded with merchants and travelers became abandoned. Trade stopped between villages because anyone traveling openly risked being attacked by Philistine raiders. Families began hiding in caves and forests just to survive another night without being discovered. At sunset, doors slammed shut across villages throughout the land. Mothers held crying children close whenever soldiers passed nearby. The Philistines seemed unstoppable. Children grew up hearing terrifying stories about them, whispered around fires late at night. Entire generations of Israelites learned how to hide instead of fight. And in the middle of this broken nation lived a man named Shamgar. Very little was known about him. He was not a king living inside fortified walls. He was not a military commander surrounded by soldiers. He had no famous reputation, no wealth, and no powerful family name. Shamgar was simply a farmer. Every morning before sunrise, he walked into the fields beneath the cold dawn air and worked until darkness covered the hills again at evening. His hands were rough and scarred from years of hard labor. Dirt permanently stained his skin. His shoulders ached constantly from guiding heavy plows through rocky ground beneath endless heat. While others hid from Philistine patrols inside caves and mountains, Shamgar remained out in the open because his family still needed food to survive. His life followed the same exhausting pattern every single day. Wake before sunrise, work until exhaustion, sleep, then wake up and repeat everything again. He owned no armor, no sword hung at his side, no shield rested inside his home. The only thing in his hands was an ox goad. The weapon that would one day terrify an army began as nothing more than a farming tool. The ox goad was nearly 8 feet long, carved from heavy wood, thick enough to survive years of brutal labor. One end held a sharp metal point used to guide stubborn oxen while plowing fields. The other carried a flat iron scraper designed to clear mud from plow blades. It was heavy, awkward, and poorly balanced. It was made for dirt and animals, not war. Still, every single day Shamgar watched the Philistines march across Israel like they owned the land. From the ridges near his farm, he could see enemy patrols moving through valleys below. Their armor reflected brightly beneath the afternoon sunlight, while swords and spears clattered against shields as they walked confidently through Israelite territory. He watched them enter villages without fear. He saw them steal food from starving families. Sometimes, smoke rose into the sky where homes had been burned. Other times, distant screaming echoed through the hills while terrified villagers fled into hiding. For years, Shamgar stayed silent like everyone else. Survival was all that mattered anymore. Keep your head down, avoid the soldiers, live another day. But something inside him slowly began changing. Every burned home, every frightened child, every hungry family. The anger buried itself deeper inside him year after year. The entire nation lived beneath fear, but inside Shamgar, fear slowly hardened into rage. Then one scorching afternoon, everything changed forever. What do you think is more powerful? Training and weapons? Or pure rage? Please comment down below. The heat that day was unbearable. Dust clung to Shamgar's skin while sweat rolled down his face. Then suddenly the earth beneath his feet trembled. At first it was faint. Then came the sound. Heavy marching boots, clanking armor, voices, laughter. Shamgar stopped working immediately. Slowly, he lifted his head toward the hills. Across the fields, a massive group of Philistine soldiers marched directly toward his farm. Hundreds of them. Sunlight flashed across bronze helmets and iron weapons. 600 armed Philistines. This was not a simple patrol. These were trained warriors carrying iron swords, heavy shields, long spears, and armor built for war. They marched with complete confidence because nobody resisted them anymore. To the Philistines, Shamgar looked pathetic. A sweaty farmer standing alone in the dirt with a wooden farming pole in his hands. The soldiers laughed as they approached. Some pointed toward the ox goad mockingly. Others shouted insults across the field. A few drew their swords, slowly smiling as though the fight was already finished before it began. They expected him to run. Everyone always ran. But Shamgar did not move. Years of fear, humiliation, and buried anger rose inside him all at once, like fire erupting from the ground itself. He stared across the fields at the soldiers marching onto his land. He looked at the armor that had terrorized Israel for years. He looked at the weapons that had driven families into caves and mountains, like frightened animals. Then, he tightened his grip around the rough wood of the ox goad until his knuckles turned white. The hot wind blew dust across the field while the Philistines continued spreading around him confidently. Still, Shamgar refused to step backward. Something inside him had finally broken. He planted his feet firmly into the dirt of his farm and decided that if he died that day, he would die standing. The first Philistine soldiers approached slowly, grinning as though they were about to crush a helpless animal. Then Shamgar moved. With explosive force, he swung the heavy ox goad through the air using both hands. The flat iron scraper smashed directly into the helmet of the first soldier with a brutal crack that echoed across the field. The man collapsed instantly into the dirt. Before the others could react, Shamgar spun the long pole around and drove the sharp metal point into another attacker. The second soldier fell backward, gasping. The Philistines froze. The laughter disappeared immediately. A lone farmer had just killed 2 armed soldiers within seconds. Angry shouts exploded across the field. Embarrassed and furious, the Philistines charged toward him together, believing their overwhelming numbers would crush him instantly. But Shamgar fought with terrifying strength. The long reach of the ox goad gave him an advantage the soldiers had not expected. Their shorter swords forced them dangerously close before they could strike him, but the heavy farming pole could hit them long before they entered range. Shamgar also knew every inch of the terrain around his farm. Instead of remaining in the open fields, he backed toward narrow, rocky spaces and uneven ground. where only a few soldiers could approach him at once. The battle exploded into chaos. Wood slammed against bronze shields with deafening force. Spears scraped across stone. Dust rose violently into the sky beneath pounding boots, while soldiers shouted over one another in confusion. Shamgar swung the ox goad again and again with brutal power. The heavy iron scraper crushed helmets and shattered bones. The sharp metal point pierced armor whenever soldiers lunged too close. Every movement came from years of hard labor beneath the blazing sun. The Philistines kept attacking, and Shamgar kept fighting. A soldier lunged forward with a spear aimed directly toward Shamgar's chest. Shamgar knocked the weapon aside with the thick wooden shaft and smashed the attacker across the jaw so hard the man spun violently into the dirt. Another soldier rushed from the side, swinging a sword downward. The ox goad whipped through the air and struck him across the face before the blade could fall. More soldiers charged forward immediately afterward. Shamgar stepped deeper into the rocky terrain, forcing them into smaller attacks instead of allowing them to surround him all at once. Minutes turned into hours. The battlefield became a storm of dust, violence, and screaming men. Philistine soldiers stumbled over fallen bodies while others pushed forward behind them. Shields collided, spears snapped. Still, Shamgar fought. His muscles burned from exhaustion. Sweat soaked his clothes completely. His hands split open from gripping the splintering wood so tightly. Yet he refused to stop moving. The Philistines slowly realized something horrifying. They were losing. Dozens of soldiers already covered the ground. Every time they tried rushing him together, the narrow terrain trapped them into smaller groups, where the ox goad became deadly. What should have been an easy slaughter slowly transformed into panic. Others watched in horror as another Philistine crashed into the dirt beneath the swinging ox goad. This was no longer a simple farmer defending his field. This man was destroying them. According to Judges 3:31, Shamgar struck down 600 Philistines with the ox goad and delivered Israel from oppression. Still, the battle continued. The afternoon sun drifted lower across the sky, while long shadows stretched over the torn fields. Dust covered Shamgar from head to toe. Blood stained the heavy wood in his hands. His breathing became slower and heavier with every passing moment. Yet he kept advancing, swing after swing, step after step, hour after hour. A Philistine soldier charged with a raised shield, trying to overpower him directly. Shamgar slammed the ox goad into the shield so hard the man lost balance instantly, then drove the sharp metal point through the opening beneath the armor. Another attacker rushed immediately behind him. The iron scraper smashed into the side of the man's helmet with a sickening crash. The battlefield echoed with screams and clashing metal. The Philistines, who once marched proudly through Israel, now stumbled backward in fear before a single exhausted farmer. Their confidence vanished completely. Some soldiers shouted desperately for others to advance, while others tried pulling away from the front lines. Panic spread rapidly. Still, Shamgar refused to slow down. His arms felt heavy as stone. His lungs burned for air. Sweat mixed with blood and dirt across his face. But every time another soldier approached, the ox goad rose. The sounds of battle echoed through the hills for miles. Wood crashing against armor, men shouting in panic, spears scraping stone, boots pounding dirt. The battle stretched on beneath the blazing sky until the afternoon slowly faded toward evening. The surviving Philistines finally looked around and understood what was happening. Bodies covered the ground around them. Their soldiers were falling faster than they could replace them. The mighty conquerors who had terrorized Israel for years suddenly looked terrified themselves. And still Shamgar advanced. The evening wind slowly swept across the battlefield. The The remaining Philistines finally broke. Some turned and ran across the fields. Others stumbled backward in panic, desperate to escape the exhausted farmer still gripping the blood-stained ox goad. And then, slowly, the battlefield fell silent. The wind carried the dust away. What remained behind looked impossible. Bodies of Philistine soldiers covered the torn fields. Broken shields and dropped weapons lay scattered across the dirt. 600 Philistines had fallen. 600 trained warriors destroyed by one man. And standing in the middle of the battlefield was Shamgar, exhausted, bleeding, covered in sweat, dust, and blood, still gripping the splintered ox goad in trembling hands. The sun slowly disappeared behind the hills, while silence settled over the ruined fields. One farmer had destroyed an entire military force. The news spread across Israel faster than wildfire. Whispers traveled through caves, forests, villages, and mountain paths. A farmer defeated 600 Philistines. The enemy had looked unstoppable. Their armor, weapons, and armies made them appear invincible. But after that day, something changed across the land. People slowly stepped out from hiding. Families walked abandoned roads again. Villages began rebuilding burned homes. And throughout the hills and valleys of Israel, the story spread from mouth to mouth. The story of Shamgar. One wrong move, and the prophet would die. They lowered him slowly into the dark pit. The thick mud swallowed his body almost instantly. With every passing second, the prophet sank deeper, slowly drowning in darkness while the guards laughed, mocked him, and left him there to die. But in the middle of the chaos, a simple servant ran to save him. Ebed-Melech lived in Jerusalem peacefully, but soon a terrifying threat moved closer to Jerusalem. The Babylonians were powerful conquerors, known for their brutal armies, massive sieges, and ruthless destruction. And the only voice that could save Jerusalem from destruction was the prophet that was slowly dying. But to understand why the prophet was forced to drown in the mud, we must first go back to the beginning of Ebed-Melech's story. A long time ago, in the grand and terrifying city of Jerusalem, lived a man named Ebed-Melech. He was a humble servant from the distant, sun-baked land of Cush, but he was about to become the single bravest hero in an entire burning kingdom. The city he lived in, Jerusalem, was slowly and painfully choking to death. Outside the massive stone walls, a monstrous army from a faraway empire called Babylon had set up their camp. These ruthless warriors were a crushing machine of human history. Their heavy iron armor shined like a terrifying sea of fire, and their huge, monstrous siege weapons cast long, dark shadows over the frightened city. They had surrounded Jerusalem so completely that not a single person could escape, and not a single crumb of bread could be brought inside the gates. The air inside the city was heavy, filled with the endless sounds of crying babies and the sour smell of pure fear. The people were starving. The royal bakeries were completely empty, and desperation had turned good neighbors into wild, angry people willing to fight over a single drop of water. Out of all the thousands of trapped people, there was one man who the arrogant city leaders hated more than the mighty Babylonian army waiting outside. His name was Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet who spoke the very words of the creator of the universe, and his words were absolutely terrifying. He stood right in the middle of the dusty streets and shouted that the beautiful city was completely doomed. He looked at the rich kings and the starving people, declaring that God was allowing the Babylonians to destroy Jerusalem because the people had been terribly, unforgivably wicked. His brutal, honest message was clear. If you stay inside these giant stone walls and try to fight, you will die a horrible death by the sword or starvation. But if you walk out the gates right now and surrender to the cruel Babylonians, you will live. To the powerful, greedy princes of Jerusalem, these words were pure poison. They wanted to fight to the bitter end, even if every innocent child in the city starved to death. They hated Jeremiah with a burning, blinding passion and wanted to shut his mouth forever. They thought they could simply bury the prophet alive and make his terrifying words disappear into the dirt. But they had absolutely no idea that a quiet foreigner, watching from the dark shadows of the palace, was about to make a shocking decision that would flip the fate of the dying kingdom completely upside down. The vicious princes marched right up to King Zedekiah. The king wore a heavy, beautiful golden crown, but on the inside, he was a weak, terrified, cowardly little man. When the angry princes demanded that Jeremiah be taken away, the king just threw his hands up in the air, basically signing the great prophet's death warrant without lifting a single finger to stop them. The princes did not just want to kill Jeremiah quickly with a sharp sword. They wanted him to suffer a slow, agonizing, mind-breaking death. They dragged the old prophet violently away to a giant cistern, a massive, incredibly deep hole carved straight into the earth. Because of the horrible drought, there was no drinking water inside. But the bottom of this pitch-black pit was far worse than dry dirt. It was a thick, freezing, suffocating swamp of heavy black mud. The princes tied rough, painfully scratching ropes around Jeremiah's waist and shoved him over the edge, lowering him down into absolute pitch-black darkness. Down he went, the light of the sun disappearing above him like a dying star. When his bare feet hit the bottom, he didn't stop moving. He sank. The freezing mud sucked at his legs like a living monster, pulling him down to his waist. The sickening smell of rotting earth filled his lungs. The princes pulled the ropes back up, laughed a cruel, wicked laugh at the old man trapped in the belly of the earth, and walked away to let him starve alone. It seemed like the absolute end for the great prophet. He was completely buried alive, entirely forgotten by the world above. But before the freezing mud could completely swallow the prophet's final breath, deep inside the royal palace, Ebed-Melech was about to do something so wildly dangerous and reckless, it could easily cost him his own head before the sun came up. Ebed-Melech was walking quietly through the grand halls of the palace when he heard the awful whispers. He heard the cruel, heavily armed guards laughing about the old man sinking in the mud. When Ebed-Melech heard this, something deep inside his heart snapped. He was not a soldier with a shiny sword or thick armor. He was just a servant. But the absolute, disgusting wickedness of leaving a good, innocent man to rot filled him with a massive, unstoppable fire of righteous anger. He knew exactly what the risks were. If he opened his mouth, the angry, violent princes might grab him by the throat and throw him into the hole, too. He knew Jeremiah had no food or water, and the frail prophet would be dead in a matter of hours from the crushing weight of the mud squeezing his chest. Ebed-Melech did not hide in his room. He did not wait for someone else to be the hero. He marched straight out of the palace and walked directly toward the gate of Benjamin, where King Zedekiah was sitting surrounded by his terrifying royal guard. To approach the king without an invitation and to loudly accuse the king's most powerful friends of pure evil was practically suicide. Ebed-Melech stood before the king, completely surrounded by giant guards carrying spears who could end his life in a single second. With a loud, booming voice that echoed off the ancient stone walls, Ebed-Melech pointed his finger right at the corruption. He looked the terrified king straight in the eyes and yelled, "My lord the king! These men have done an incredibly evil thing. They have thrown Jeremiah the prophet into the cistern. He is going to die down there in the mud right now because there is no more bread left anywhere in the entire city. It was a breathtaking, heart-stopping moment of pure, unfiltered bravery. A servant from Africa standing in front of the king of Judah, loudly calling out the most powerful men in the city for being absolute monsters. King Zedekiah, totally shocked by the explosive courage of this one servant, finally woke up and did the right thing. He ordered Ebed-Melech to take 30 strong, muscular men and pull Jeremiah out of the death pit immediately. The king gave the order, and that was a miracle in itself. But the hardest, most impossible part was yet to come. Because saving a weak, dying man from the freezing, suctioning belly of the earth required a brilliant, gentle, genius plan that absolutely no one saw coming, or else the rescue itself would quickly kill the prophet. Ebed-Melech rushed frantically back into the palace, his mind working 10 times faster than normal. He knew Jeremiah was an incredibly old, starving, frail man. If they just threw rough, heavy ropes down the terrifying hole and violently yanked the old man up with the strength of 30 men, the ropes would instantly slice right through his delicate skin, breaking his ribs and tearing his flesh. Pulling him out the wrong, careless way could kill him faster than the mud. So, Ebed-Melech ran down into a secret, dusty storage room deep under the royal treasury, where old, useless, forgotten things were thrown away. He frantically dug through the piles and gathered huge bundles of old, soft rags and pieces of worn-out, gentle fabric. He bundled these soft rags high into his arms, grabbed the thick, heavy ropes, and led his 30 strong men, sprinting through the city streets to the prison courtyard. They arrived at the edge of the pit and looked down into the terrifying, pitch-black hole that smelled like death. Ebed-Melech called down, his loud voice echoing in the deep cavern. He carefully lowered the huge bundle of soft rags down on a string first, followed closely by the heavy ropes. He yelled down into the total darkness, "Jeremiah, listen to my voice. Take these old rags and put them securely under your armpits, and then wrap the heavy ropes tightly around the rags." It was an incredible sight. In a burning, starving city where people were literally killing each other in the streets for a dirty crust of bread, this foreign servant was taking the extra time to make sure an old man's skin wouldn't get bruised. Down in the horrible dark, violently shivering and completely covered in freezing slime, Jeremiah did exactly as he was told. He tucked the soft, warm rags under his arms and tied the ropes tightly. Ebed-Melech gave the loud command. The 30 men planted their boots into the stone floor, grabbed the ropes, and pulled with all their might. The mud fought back fiercely, holding onto the prophet like a giant sticky hand. The men strained, their muscles burning until the mud made a loud, disgusting, squelching sound and finally let go. They pulled Jeremiah up, hand over hand, up the terrifying tunnel until he tumbled over the edge onto the hard stone floor. He was a horrific sight, caked entirely in thick black mud, gasping for air, shaking violently, and looking like a ghost. But he was breathing. He was alive. Against all odds, Ebed-Melech had just snatched a man right out of the terrifying jaws of death. The great prophet was safe for the moment. But the incredible, mind-blowing story was still far from over. A terrifying, unstoppable fire was about to fall from the sky upon the entire city, and out of the smoking ashes of a ruined kingdom, Ebed-Melech's own fate was about to be sealed forever by a secret, shocking message from God himself. Outside the city walls, the clock had finally run out. The mighty, terrifying Babylonian army was preparing their final, devastating, earth-shattering attack. Jerusalem was about to be completely wiped off the map of the world. Every single person inside the walls was going to either be slaughtered or dragged away into a lifetime of slavery. But God in heaven, who sees absolutely everything, had seen exactly what happened in that muddy courtyard. He had watched the rich princes act like vicious cowards. He had watched the king hide in fear, and he had watched Ebed-Melech, a servant from another country, risk his own life and use his brilliant mind to save a dying prophet. And the creator of the universe absolutely never forgets a brave heart. While Jeremiah was resting, the word of the Lord came to him with a private, top-secret message. It wasn't for the king, and it wasn't for the generals. It was specifically, exclusively for the servant holding the dirty rags. Jeremiah looked at Ebed-Melech and spoke the very words of God, a promise so powerful it would give anyone goosebumps. I am about to fulfill my words against this city through absolute disaster. But I will rescue you on that day, declares the Lord. You will not be handed over to those violent men you fear. I will completely save you. And then, just days later, the nightmare finally exploded. The Babylonians smashed through the incredibly thick stone walls. The horrific sound of screaming and breaking stone echoed for miles into the mountains. The sky turned completely black with choking smoke, as the beautiful royal palace and grand houses were set completely on fire. The cruel princes were hunted down in the streets and captured. King Zedekiah tried to run away into the desert in the pitch-black night. But the terrifying Babylonian soldiers chased him down, violently blinded him, and wrapped him in heavy bronze chains to rot in a foreign prison. The great city of Jerusalem was completely, utterly destroyed, turned into a giant pile of smoking, bloody rocks. But right in the absolute middle of the choking smoke, the crashing walls, and the terrifying, screaming soldiers swinging giant swords, there was one single man walking through the total chaos, completely and miraculously unharmed. Just as God had sworn to him, the sharp swords of the Babylonians did not even touch Ebed-Melech. He walked right out of the dying, burning city, stepping over the ruins, and escaped with his life, walking into the future protected by the hand of God. Jephthah's own parents begged him to come back and save their nation. Years earlier, they had thrown him out and erased him from their lives. Hurt, angry, and completely lost, Jephthah wandered into the wilderness, searching for meaning. But out there, he slowly became the leader of a dangerous group of fighters feared across the land. And when Israel was finally on the edge of destruction, Jephthah became their only hope. To understand why his own parents kicked him out, we must go back to the beginning of his story. Israel was stuck in a terrible, violent loop. The people turned away from God, their enemies attacked, and the country got worse with every generation. As the nation grew darker, even its heroes became dangerous and deeply broken. In that harsh world, a boy named Jephthah was born. His father was a rich and important leader named Gilead. Gilead was married and had several sons with his wife, but Jephthah was not one of them. Jephthah's mother was a prostitute. His father had cheated on his wife. Instead of sending the boy away, Gilead brought Jephthah into his main house to grow up with his other children. Back then, who your parents were meant everything. It decided your money and your future, because he lived in the main house. Jephthah was a walking reminder that his father had cheated. To his father's wife and her kids, he was a living, breathing secret they hated. Even worse, as Jephthah grew older, his half-brothers worried he would take away the land and money they were supposed to inherit. When the other sons grew up, they decided they wanted him gone. They trapped Jephthah and forced him out. "You will not get a single thing in our father's house," they told him. "You are the son of another woman." They didn't just kick him out of the house. They drove him out of the town completely. The city leaders, the men who were supposed to be fair and protect people, just watched it happen. Jephthah lost his family, his home, and his rights. He was thrown away like a mistake they wanted to erase. He walked away from the only life he knew and headed east, deep into the wild. He reached an empty, rough place called Tob. It was a dangerous land near the desert where polite people never went. But Jephthah was no longer a polite man. He had to eat, and he had to survive. Slowly, the desert drew other people to him. The Bible calls them worthless troublemakers, but they were really just castaways. They were men who owed too much money, men running from the law, men who had been chewed up and spit out by society, just like Jephthah. They gathered around him, and he became their leader. In the harsh desert, Jephthah turned this group of rejects into a deadly army for hire. They robbed, they fought, and they survived. Jephthah learned to be tough, smart, and ruthless. The boy who was thrown away turned into a dangerous warlord. While Jephthah was growing stronger in the shadows, the nation that kicked him out was falling apart. The Israelites had once again started bowing down to the fake gods of the countries around them. This time, when they cried out for God's help, the Ammonite army moved in. The Ammonites crossed the Jordan River and set up their camp, ready to wipe Israel off the map. The Israelites were terrified. The city leaders of Gilead, the very same men who let Jephthah be thrown out, held a panicked meeting. They had no general. They had no army. In their fear, they said whoever would lead the fight would become the ruler of the people. But no one stepped forward. Fear makes people selfish. The leaders looked around at each other, but nobody wanted to risk dying. Then, someone finally remembered Jephthah, the outcast, the criminal, the dangerous fighter living in the wilderness. Suddenly, the man they had thrown away became their only hope. So the leaders traveled out into the wilderness to find him. Imagine the moment. The same people who once watched him get kicked out now came crawling back because they needed him. The leaders stood before Jephthah and begged him to come back and save them from the Ammonites. Jephthah looked at them and basically said, "Are you serious? You hated me. You threw me out. Why should I help you now?" The leaders admitted they were desperate. They promised if he saved them, he would become their permanent ruler. Jephthah agreed, but he made them swear an oath before God. Before marching to war, Jephthah tried something surprising. He sent messengers to the Ammonite king, asking why they were attacking Israel. The Ammonite king claimed the Israelites had stolen his land years earlier when they came out of Egypt. Jephthah answered carefully. He explained that Israel had not stolen the land from the Ammonites. They had taken it from another nation during battle after that nation attacked them first. He reminded the king that Israel had lived there for hundreds of years already. If the land really belonged to the Ammonites, why had they waited so long to ask for it back? But the Ammonite king ignored everything Jephthah said. He wanted war. So Jephthah prepared his men and got ready to fight. Before the battle, something happened that would destroy his life forever. Jephthah prayed to God and made a vow. He promised that if God gave him victory, he would sacrifice whatever first came out of his house when he returned home safely. It was a terrible promise, but Jephthah was desperate. Then the Spirit of God came upon Jephthah. He gathered his fighters and marched toward the Ammonites. The battle exploded across the hills and cities. Jephthah and his men crushed the Ammonites. 20 cities fell before them. The enemy army collapsed, and Israel was saved. Jephthah had become exactly what the leaders needed, a brutal warrior who could win wars. But as Jephthah rode home after the victory, he saw someone running out of his house to greet him. It was his daughter, his only child, dancing with joy because her father had returned alive. Jephthah tore his clothes in horror. He told her about the vow he had made to God before the battle. The girl answered with unbelievable courage. She told her father if he had made the promise before God, he had to keep it. But she asked for 2 months first. She wanted time to go into the mountains with her friends and mourn the fact that she would never marry or have children. After the 2 months ended, she returned to her father. Jephthah did what he had promised in his vow. The Bible never really describes what happened next, and people still debate it today. Some believe he literally sacrificed his daughter. Others think she was devoted to serving God for the rest of her life. Either way, the ending is heartbreaking. The man who saved Israel lost the thing he loved most because of a reckless promise spoken in desperation. Jephthah ruled Israel for 6 years. Then he died, and they buried him in one of the towns of Gilead. His time as ruler was short, bloody, and tragic. When people think about Jephthah, they usually remember the horrible vow and the innocent daughter who paid the price for her father's mistake. But Jephthah's story is bigger than that. It is the story of what happens when a broken person gains power without healing first. Jephthah was rejected, humiliated, and thrown away by the people who should have protected him. Instead of healing from his pain, he buried it under anger, violence, and pride. His daughter became the cost of a promise that never should have been spoken. That is what makes Jephthah's story so terrifying. It is not just about one bad decision. It is about how pain can twist a person if it is never healed. In the end, the greatest victory of his life became his greatest tragedy. He defeated Israel's enemies, but he could not defeat the brokenness inside himself. One wrong decision, and the ground would swallow them whole. A powerful man named Korah grew jealous of Moses' power, so he gathered people to challenge him and to challenge God himself. Millions stood watching beside the tabernacle, and then suddenly, the ground began to shake. Families screamed, the earth split apart, and fire fell from heaven itself. But to understand how it all started, we must go back to the beginning of Korah's story. Long ago, in the hot, sandy desert, a massive nation called the Israelites was traveling together. There were millions of them, men, women, and children, along with all their sheep, goats, and cows. They lived in a huge, sprawling camp made of thousands of tents. It was like a giant moving city built right on top of the dry, dusty earth. The sun was always beating down on them, and the wind blew hot sand into their faces. Life was difficult, but they were not alone. Right in the exact middle of this massive camp was one special, beautiful tent called the Tabernacle. This was the holy tent where the presence of God lived among his people. It was made of colorful cloth, thick animal skins, and shining gold. A tall pillar of cloud stood over it during the day, and a pillar of bright fire rested over it at night. Because this tent was so holy, only one specific group of people was allowed to touch it or take care of it. This group was the tribe of Levi. Inside this special tribe, there was a man named Korah. He belonged to a family group called the Kohathites. Whenever the big pillar of cloud moved, it was time for the whole camp to pack up and travel. Korah and his family had the most important job of all. They physically carried the holy furniture from inside God's tent. They did not use carts. They carried the heavy golden table, the shining lampstand, and the incredibly sacred wooden box called the Ark of the Covenant right on their own shoulders, using long wooden poles to support the weight as they walked through the hot, shifting sand. It was a hard job, but it was a great honor. Out of all the millions of people in the world, God trusted Korah's family to hold these holy things. But Korah was not happy. Every day the heavy lifting made his shoulders tired, and his heart started to fill up with dark, ugly jealousy. He began to look at his work not as a gift, but as a burden. Korah was the cousin of Moses and Aaron. Moses was the great leader who guided the whole nation. Aaron was the high priest. While Korah sweated in the hot sun, he watched his cousin Aaron wear beautiful, bright priestly clothes covered in shiny, colorful jewels that sparkled in the sunlight. Aaron had little golden bells on his coat that made a musical sound when he walked. He was the only man in the world allowed to walk behind the thick curtain into the most holy room inside the tent. Korah watched all of this and got very angry. He felt like he was being treated like a simple worker, even though he came from the same family. He wanted the shiny jewels and the power of the high priest. He started to whisper to his friends that Moses and Aaron were just greedy leaders who made up all these rules to keep themselves at the top. Korah knew he could not fight Moses alone. So one evening, he quietly walked through the dusty streets to the side of the camp where the tribe of Reuben lived. The tribe of Reuben had their own bitterness. A long time ago, their great-grandfather had been the oldest son, which meant their tribe was supposed to be the leaders. Because of bad things that happened in the past, they lost their chance. Many of the men there were angry, feeling they had been cheated out of their power. In this angry part of the camp, Korah found 3 men, Dathan, Abiram, and On. He sat down in their tents and told them that Moses was a bad leader, and that they deserved to be the bosses. Dathan and Abiram agreed immediately. They were the perfect partners for Korah's secret plan. Together, these men sneaked around the camp, knocking on tents and whispering in the shadows. They specifically looked for the rich, famous, and respected men. They complained and lied, making Moses and Aaron look like greedy bullies. Slowly, they convinced 250 very important leaders to join their secret rebellion. Korah had built a huge, angry mob, and he was finally ready to strike. When the day came, they marched right through the middle of the camp, stepping hard in the dirt, making a lot of noise. People came out of their tents to watch. A massive crowd followed them to where Moses and Aaron were standing. Korah stood up tall in front of everyone and pointed his finger at his cousins, using smooth, tricky words.
Moses and Aaron have taken too much power for themselves,
he said. He declared that every person in the camp was holy and that God was with all of them. He demanded to know why Moses and Aaron acted like they were so much better than everyone else. When Moses heard these proud, mean words, he was completely shocked. He did not yell back or call for guards. Instead, he felt so sad and so afraid of what God would do to these foolish men that he fell flat on his face right into the dirt. Moses lay there, praying silently. Then he slowly stood back up and looked right into Korah's eyes. Moses saw through the lies clearly. He knew Korah did not care about the regular people. He just wanted the shiny clothes and the power. Moses spoke clearly, so the whole crowd could hear, reminding Korah that God had already given him an honored and close role, but now he was trying to steal the priesthood too. He warned them that by starting this fight, they were not just arguing against human leaders. They were fighting directly against God. Moses told them that God would be the judge. Then Moses gave the group a dangerous test. He told all 250 men to come back the next morning with their metal fire pans, called censers, bowls used to burn sweet-smelling incense. Normally, only the true priests were allowed to do this. Moses said that whoever God chose would be confirmed as the true, holy man. That afternoon, Moses tried to fix things peacefully. He sent a message to the tents of Dathan and Abiram, asking them to come and talk, but they refused to come out. They sent back a nasty, insulting message, calling Moses a bad and selfish boss. They even called Egypt, the place where they had been whipped as slaves and forced to build bricks in the scorching sun, a wonderful land of milk and honey. They blamed Moses for dragging them into the desert to die, and declared they would never listen to him again. Moses was deeply hurt and very angry. He prayed and asked God not to accept any offering from these lying men. He reminded God that he had never wronged them, never taken anything from them, and had always tried to lead them honestly. The next morning, the sun rose over the huge desert camp. The air was already hot. Everyone was awake and watching. Korah stood proudly at the front of the tabernacle courtyard. Behind him stood his 250 leaders, each holding a glowing censer. Thick white smoke drifted up from the sweet incense into the morning air. They were all pretending to be priests, standing there as if they had every right to be there. Millions of Israelites stood around watching with wide, nervous eyes. Suddenly, a bright, blinding light flashed over the tabernacle. It was the glory of God, and it was so incredibly bright that people had to cover their eyes. God spoke directly to Moses and Aaron like thunder, telling them to step away from the crowd. God said he was going to completely destroy everyone in the camp because they had listened to Korah's lies. But Moses and Aaron did not run to save themselves. They threw themselves flat on the ground and cried out to God, begging him to please not punish the millions of innocent people just because one man had decided to be proud and start a fight. They were true leaders who cared about the lives of their people, even those who were being foolish. God listened. He decided to spare the crowd, but was not going to let the rebel leaders escape. He told Moses to get up and warn the people to move far away from the tents of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. Moses quickly marched into the middle of the camp. The wise older men followed closely behind him. Moses raised his hands and shouted a loud warning, "Get away from the tents of these wicked men as fast as possible, and do not touch a single thing that belongs to them." The people were terrified and cleared a huge, wide circle of empty dirt around the rebels' tents. Dathan and Abiram came outside. They still did not look scared. They stood arrogantly right at the doorways of their tents, their wives and children beside them, staring at Moses as if they were completely safe. The whole camp went dead silent. Moses stood at the edge of the empty circle and spoke in a loud, echoing voice. As it is written in Numbers 16:30, Moses told the people this was how they would know who was truly in charge. If these men died a normal, peaceful death like everyone else, then God had not sent him. But if the earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up alive with everything they owned, then everyone would know these men had completely disrespected God. The very second Moses finished speaking, a terrible rumbling came from deep underground. The dirt right beneath the tents of Dathan and Abiram began to shake wildly. Then, with a loud, deafening crack, the solid ground split wide open. A huge, dark, bottomless hole appeared right under their feet. They did not have time to run. Dathan and Abiram, along with their households and all their families, screamed in terror as the ground vanished beneath them, and they fell straight down into the dark abyss. Then, as fast as it had opened, the earth slammed violently shut. The ground became completely solid again. The tents were gone. The people were gone. There was nothing left. The people standing on the edges heard the awful screams. When the ground slammed shut, the crowd panicked, screaming and crying, convinced the earth was going to swallow them next. They turned and ran as fast as they could, fleeing from the terrifying spot. At the same moment, back at the tabernacle, the 250 men were still holding their censers. A roaring fire shot straight out from the presence of God, flashing across the courtyard like lightning. It hit the 250 men instantly. In 1 second, they were gone. The only things left were their 250 metal fire pans clattering onto the hard dirt, still smoking. A grim reminder of their failed ambition. This was also where Korah himself met his end, consumed along with those who had followed him into open rebellion against God. The massive rebellion was completely over. God had shown everyone in the desert that Moses was his chosen leader, and Aaron was his chosen priest. It was a terrifying day that no one would ever forget. But even in the middle of all this destruction, one small, quiet detail survived. When Korah had chosen to fight against Moses, he had tried to pull his whole family into the mess. But his sons had watched everything unfold. They knew their father was wrong. As the Bible tells us in Numbers 26:11, the sons of Korah did not die. When their father stood proudly in his rebellion, what if the flood of Noah was far more terrifying than you were ever told? Not just rain, but the complete destruction of the world itself. The ground split apart. The oceans exploded upward. The skies collapsed in endless darkness. And in the middle of it all, one man built a giant wooden ark to carry the last surviving humans. But it wasn't easy. He was laughed at, he was mocked, and he was tested by humanity. But to understand why Noah built a huge ark, we must go back to the beginning of his story. The world had gone totally out of control. Everywhere you looked, people were hurting each other, and terrible violence had taken over every city, village, and home. It got so bad that God's heart broke, and he actually regretted making human beings in the first place. The corruption across the planet was absolute, except for one man. Noah was the last good person left. He walked with God, chose kindness when everyone else chose cruelty, and told the truth in a world built on lies. Because of that, God chose him for a task that sounded completely impossible. God spoke directly to Noah and delivered a terrifying warning. A flood was coming to destroy everything on the earth. But God offered a single shred of hope, giving Noah a specific rescue plan to build a massive wooden chest called an ark. This wasn't a normal boat built for sailing or steering. It was a giant, 3-story box designed purely to float and survive. The scale was staggering, longer than a football field and taller than a 4-story building. Noah had to build it out of gopher wood and seal every single crack inside and out with thick black tar called pitch. Without arguing or questioning the sheer madness of the project, Noah picked up his tools and got to work. For decades, Noah's life was defined by the sound of axes chopping trees and hammers pounding wood. He and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, spent years cutting down massive logs and hauling them across the dirt to build this giant mountain of wood. It sat right in the middle of dry land, miles from any ocean or lake. Naturally, his neighbors thought he had lost his mind. Every day people walked past the construction site to point, laugh, and mock the old man, warning about a sky that had never fallen. They kept right on partying, eating, drinking, and getting married, completely blind to reality. But Noah never stopped hammering, showing the world that he trusted God more than he feared their insults. When the giant fortress was finally finished, standing tall and windowless against the sky, the instructions changed. God told Noah It was time to collect the animals. 7 pairs of every clean animal and 1 pair of every unclean animal, along with the birds of the air. Noah didn't have to hunt them down with ropes and nets. Instead, a quiet miracle unfolded right before the eyes of the mocking townspeople. An unseen instinct guided creatures from the forests, deserts, and mountains straight to the ark. Predators walked peacefully right next to prey. Wolves alongside sheep and lions next to deer. Thousands of birds darkened the sky, flying straight into the upper decks. Once the lower levels were packed with tons of grain and food, Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and his sons' wives walked away from the only world they had ever known. They stepped inside the dark, cavernous ship, surrounded by the heavy breathing of the animal kingdom. Then came the most chilling moment of the story. The Bible says that the Lord shut him in. Noah didn't close the door. God did it himself. With a massive, echoing slam, the hand of God sealed that giant door from the outside, locking the boundary between mercy and judgment. No one inside could open it, and no one outside could break it down. For 7 days, absolutely nothing happened. The ark just sat there in the quiet heat, and the neighbors likely had one last laugh, banging on the wooden hull and mocking Noah for trapping himself in a giant cage under a sunny sky. But on the 17th day of the 2nd month, the laughter stopped instantly. The universe seemed to tear completely apart. It wasn't just a heavy rainstorm, it was a total breakdown of the Earth's geography. The springs of the Great Deep burst open, fracturing the ground and sending massive geysers of subterranean water erupting violently into the sky. At the exact same moment, the floodgates of heaven were ripped wide, pouring down a blinding, crushing sheet of water. Raging rivers swallowed the valleys in a matter of hours. People scrambled out of their homes in a panic, running toward the highest hills and climbing the tallest trees, watching the dark water rise relentlessly around them. Right before their eyes, the massive ark creaked, groaned, and lifted completely off the ground, floating perfectly on top of the violent tide. The door was locked, and the water kept coming. For 40 days and 40 nights, the water never stopped falling from the sky or erupting from the ground. It rose higher and higher, swallowing the hills, drowning the forests, and eventually covering the tops of the tallest mountains on Earth by more than 20 feet. Every single living thing on dry land perished. The birds, the cattle, the wild beasts, and all of humanity were completely gone, erased from the face of the earth. The world was turned right back into what it looked like before creation. Just a vast, dark, featureless ocean with no land in sight. Inside the ark, the world was incredibly small, dark, and terrifyingly loud. The massive ship was constantly tossed around by giant waves, creaking under the unbelievable pressure of a global ocean. For 150 days, the water completely dominated the planet. Noah and his family were suspended in the middle of a global graveyard, separated from a watery death by just a few inches of pitched wood. They couldn't look out of a side window to see where they were going because there were no landmarks left. There was only the endless, exhausting daily routine of feeding the animals, shoveling waste in the dark, and listening to the water smash against the hull. In those long, pitch-black months, it would have been so easy for despair to take over. Noah must have wondered if they were going to float out there until they ran out of food. Had God forgotten about them? Were they doomed to be the last humans alive, trapped in a wooden box forever? But then, the story takes a beautiful turn. The ancient texts say, "But God remembered Noah." This doesn't mean God forgot about Noah like a misplaced pair of keys. It means God was now ready to act on his promise. He sent a powerful wind blowing across the surface of the earth, and the waters finally stopped rising. The underground springs were blocked, the floodgates of heaven were locked tight, and the rain finally stopped falling from the black sky. Slowly, day by day, the water level began to drop. Exactly 5 months after the flood started, the ark finally came to a sudden, gentle stop. It didn't crash into a rock or split open. It settled right on top of the mountains of Ararat. The long, violent journey of floating across a dead world was over, but they still couldn't leave. They had to wait for months as the water continued to drain away, slowly revealing the jagged tops of nearby mountains, like little islands rising out of a retreating sea. After 40 more days of waiting, Noah decided it was time to test the world outside. He opened a small window at the top of the ark and released a raven. The raven is a strong, tough scavenger bird, and it just flew back and forth, landing on floating debris and dead matter, never coming back to stay, because the earth was still covered in water. Noah realized he needed a better test, so he sent out a dove. A dove is a completely different kind of bird. It needs clean, dry ground and living plants to survive. The first time the dove flew out, it found absolutely nowhere to land, so it flew straight back to the ark. Noah reached his hand out of the window, pulled the tired little bird back inside, and waited another 7 days. He released the dove a second time. The family waited all day, staring up at the small window in the ceiling. In the evening, the dove flew back through the opening, and this time it had something in its beak, a freshly plucked olive leaf. That tiny green leaf was the very first sign of life from the new world. It meant the valleys were finally clearing, trees were growing again, and the judgment was officially over. Noah waited 7 more days and sent the dove out a third time. This time, it never came back. It had found a permanent home in a reborn creation. Finally, when Noah was 601 years old, the water was completely gone. Noah reached up and removed the heavy top covering of the ark, looking out at the world for the first time in over a year. The landscape was completely unrecognizable. The grand cities, the violent kingdoms, and the broken societies were gone without a trace. In their place was a quiet, muddy, empty earth, completely wiped clean and waiting to start over. Then, the voice of God spoke to Noah with the words he had been waiting more than 370 days to hear. Come out of the ark, you and your wife and your sons and their wives. Bring out every living creature, so they can multiply on the earth and be fruitful. The massive door was opened, and Noah's family stepped out onto solid ground. Imagine that first breath of fresh air, the feeling of real dirt beneath their feet, and the warmth of the sun after a year of living in a dark, cramped ship. The animals came pouring out of the hull, running, jumping, and flying into the hills and valleys. The very first thing Noah did in this brand new world wasn't building a house for himself or planting crops. Instead, he built an altar to the Lord. He took some of the clean animals and birds and offered them as a sacrifice of thanksgiving. He wanted to show God how incredibly grateful they were to be alive, recognizing that their survival wasn't because they were perfect, but because of pure mercy. And God made a beautiful, binding promise to Noah and his family. He looked at humanity and acknowledged that even though people would still make mistakes and battle with bad thoughts, he would never again destroy the entire earth with a flood. As long as the earth endures, God promised, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night will never cease.
These videos take many hours to make. If you could, please like and subscribe. Also, we want to know which countries our viewers are watching this video from. Please comment the country you are watching from. Thank you. Until the next video.